We're back with another exciting episode. We hope you're loving our content, and there's plenty more to come. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay notified about new episodes. Now let's dive into the podcast. Enjoy.
All right, welcome back everyone to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into some specific source material that gives us a look at one particular viewpoint on, well, wealth and influence.
That's right. And the source we're working from today is actually a chapter titled Chapter 7, Money Talks, Wealth and Influence.
And the focus of this chapter is Andrew Tate's philosophy, his strategies, and kind of the implications of wealth and influence, all seen through his lens. Now, our goal here is simple, but it's really important. We're here to guide you through this text, pulling out the key ideas and insights found, right there in its pages.
Yeah, and it's really crucial to get this up front.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we're talking about today comes straight out of the source material we were given. We're trying to help you understand the ideas, the examples presented in this specific chapter. We're not, here to agree or disagree with it ourselves. We're just exploring the text provided.
Absolutely. Think of us as your guides for this particular map of one way of looking at wealth. And wow, the journey laid out in this chapter covers a lot. We'll look at the core philosophy presented, get into specific strategies the text mentions, like real estate and crypto.
Right, and also the role of education, as it's described here, how wealth is shown as a tool for influence, the whole psychology of money according to the source, and even the ethical points the chapter raises.
So settle in. Let's dive right into the ideas presented in this source.
Okay, where do we start? The core idea.
Yeah, let's kick off with what the chapter presents as the absolute foundation. It makes a really strong claim. Wealth isn't just about having stacks of cash. It's framed as the main tool for getting something bigger.
Freedom.
Yes, exactly. The source positions money not as the end goal, but specifically as the way to get financial independence. And it describes this freedom as, well, getting away from the usual 9 to 5, from having a boss, and what the chapter actually calls the oppressive system, or the matrix. The matrix. Yeah, that's a powerful image, like escaping some kind of simulation that holds people back. So money is directly linked to liberation here.
And the source really emphasizes getting back your most valuable asset, your time. Wealth becomes the currency, the way you buy that time back.
Makes sense. And a key principle the source highlights for building this kind of freedom wealth, it advocates strongly for multiple income streams.
Right. The text basically warns you, don't put all your financial eggs in one basket. Diversification is protection. It's resilience.
Yeah, the focus based on the source is very much on making your money work for you, harder than just trading your time for it. This means building passive income, assets that keep generating money without you actively grinding away every day.
But, and this is a big but, in the chapter, none of this just happens. The foundation is discipline. Wealth, the source insists, needs action, constant learning, sticking with it, planning. It's not luck.
And the text actually points to Tate's own journey, from kickboxing to online businesses, as an example of this discipline and the kind of strategic shifts it talks about.
Now, here's where it gets layered. The source says, beyond just personal freedom, wealth becomes a way to have influence. Once you have it, it's a tool to shape things around you, push your narrative, maybe motivate others.
The chapter even calls it a weapon for societal change. That's pretty strong language for financial clout.
It is. And using that power, the source suggests, needs a big shift in how you think.
Yeah.
You need to go from being just a consumer to being an investor. Looking at every money decision through the lens of, well, does this get me closer to controlling my own life and having an impact?
So it's less about just getting by or buying stuff and more about thriving with a purpose, using every dollar like an investment in that freedom and influence.
Exactly. The source explains this whole philosophy builds resilience, patience, a focus on the long game. It's about building something that lasts, not just a quick buck. And it wraps this part up by framing wealth building as, quote, an invitation to battle, a fight for your own independence and impact.
Okay, that gives us a pretty clear picture of the core philosophy laid out here. Now, let's get into some of the specific strategies the source talks about for building this wealth, starting with real estate.
Right. The chapter presents real estate as way more than just owning buildings. It's seen as like securing your future, a sort of bastion of wealth, giving stability and growth potential.
And the strategy the source really highlights isn't just about collecting rent, though that's mentioned. It seems particularly focused on using property for, well, big capital gains.
Precisely. The text gives a specific early example. Him and his brother Tristan getting 2 unfinished apartments in Romania, Bravacavi, back in 2010. the strategy described, buying when the market was down and selling when it recovered. The principle, as the source lays it out, is basically buy low during downturns, sell high during upturns.
Okay, but that takes some serious foresight, right? What the source calls a sharp eye for undervalued assets, looking for places about to develop, thinking about infrastructure, spotting those demand-supply gaps.
And gives more examples, like a $740,000 investment in northern Bucharest, presented as a bet on the city growing and putting money into land near Kilmarnock, linked to an old factory, guessing that area would grow too.
So the buying strategy itself, as the source describes it, sounds pretty intense. Lots of research, hard negotiating. It quotes this belief: you earn your profit at the point of purchase, not sale. Really stressing getting properties cheap or with good terms right from the start.
Yeah, and then when it's time to sell, the source emphasizes timing, trying to hit those market peaks. But it also mentions the strategy of holding on to some properties for their long-term value and, managing them.
Which brings us to the management side the text covers. Using rental properties, especially in places people really want to live, as a way to get steady income while the property value goes up. This means upkeep, finding reliable tenants, doing upgrades now and then.
So the chapter sums up the reasoning for real estate as a wealth tool like this. 1, passive income for financial freedom. 2, asset appreciation, ideally predictable growth if you pick strategic locations. And 3, the huge importance of location and timing. Finding regions ready to boom and knowing when to get in and get out.
It definitely hammers home the idea, from the source's perspective, of seeing property not just as a place to live, but as a strategic investment. Something needing patience, strategy, and a long-term view for building a legacy.
Okay, so shifting from physical assets like buildings, the source also gets right into the digital world. Cryptocurrency and digital assets.
And the viewpoint here, as it's presented, is pretty direct. Digital money is described in the text almost poetically as code, potential, and the essence of freedom.
The source mentions a real contempt for traditional finance. It even cites an interview, I think, with Anthony Pompliano, where regular government money, fiat currency, is just called trash.
Right. And Bitcoin gets special attention for qualities the source says match its core beliefs. Being decentralized, free from government control, and having that potential for massive growth.
The source gives a specific win, too. It mentions celebrating turning $600,000 into $12 million with crypto. This is shown as proof of, trust in crypto and skill in navigating it.
And the tactics discussed in the source go beyond just buying and holding. It talks about using influence, making endorsements, predicting market moves, like calling Bitcoin's rise after a big drop. These are framed as being based on understanding the market, the tech, global trends.
The chapter even touches on exploring ways to push his own crypto projects, like something called Tate coin or the Daddy Y meme coin. Basically, using his platform to create buzz and investment in them.
So making money in crypto, according to the source, isn't just passive holding. It involves active trading, being aware of trends, maybe even creating or backing new digital projects yourself.
And the source connects this back to education, mentioning platforms like Hustlers University, or The Real World, as it's called now, as places where they teach investment techniques for this space, what to look out for, and importantly, the kind of mental strength needed to handle how wildly the prices can swing.
Now, interestingly, the source material itself brings up the controversies here. It mentions the introduction of things like the Daddy Y meme coin alongside accusations of pump and dump schemes. It specifically names detractors like commentators such as CoffeeZilla and highlights the risks these kinds of ventures might pose to investors.
Yeah, and this is presented in the chapter almost like a lesson. Crypto is a wild ride, it says, not for those lacking courage. Huge potential gains, yes, but also really significant risks. Being ready for that volatility is presented as absolutely essential.
And the source really stresses that you need education before jumping in. Understanding the tech, the market forces, potential regulations, and having the judgment to know when to buy, sell, or just wait it out.
But despite all that up and down, the source still emphasizes having a long-term view, seeing real transformative potential in digital assets overall.
So the source's angle on crypto seems to be embrace this digital shift for freedom and wealth, but do it smartly. Get educated, be optimistic but cautious, and keep your eyes open for both the opportunities and the dangers.
Which kind of flows naturally into the role of education itself as a way to get wealthy, as the source discusses it, especially looking at Hustlers University, now The Real World.
Right. The source paints this not just as some online course, but as, and I'm quoting here, a comprehensive blueprint for liberation from the societal matrix. Big claim.
The backstory given in the chapter is this belief that traditional schools often just teach people to be average, to conform, not to be exceptional. So the goal was apparently to build a platform for genuine lessons based on real-world experience in money, business, personal growth.
And the curriculum laid out in the source covers a few key areas. There's financial education, but going beyond just save your money. It gets into investing, understanding markets, crypto, real estate, stocks, teaching you to see money as a tool for freedom, how to grow small investments, all built on discipline.
Then there are the business lessons, as presented, focused on entrepreneurship, how to start, grow, manage businesses, pushing an owner mindset versus an employee one, spotting opportunities, personal branding, sales psychology. The source apparently uses Tate's own varied business background, including things like webcam studios and digital content, as live case studies.
Taking personal, sometimes controversial business history and turning it into lessons that itself shows how education can be positioned as a route to wealth, right? Monetizing experience.
But, crucially, the source identifies personal development mindset, discipline, resilience, mental toughness as the most important part of this education. It's about rewiring how you think, adopting what the source calls a winner's mindset to handle challenges and manage success, not just make money.
But the source also brings up the ethical side of selling knowledge like this. It says flat out that turning success into a curriculum requires integrity, especially if you're selling a promise, a lifestyle, an escape.
The ethical tightrope, as presented, is making sure the knowledge actually helps people, that the focus isn't just on the provider making money, but on genuinely transforming the student, fulfilling that educational promise, not just creating hype.
The source points out the huge responsibility of being a digital educator. You're shaping minds, influencing futures. So the quality of the teaching, whether the advice is sound, how open you are about your motives, these are presented as really critical things to consider.
And the final thought in this section of the source is that while teaching can make money, its main goal should be empowering others, not just getting rich yourself.
So according to the source, real wealth building seems to involve both learning yourself and teaching others, creating people who actively build their own success, maybe even in a community way. The idea being that knowledge, when shared right, should liberate people, not just profit the teacher.
And building on that idea of having wealth, the source then moves into how that wealth gets used, specifically for influence.
Yeah, the chapter is very clear. Wealth, from this viewpoint, isn't just about having stuff. It's about the impact you can have, the power you can wield. It calls wealth a loudspeaker and a catalyst for change.
And the main tool mentioned for exerting this influence is investments, but not just for getting a financial return, according to the source. It's about backing things that align with your vision or principles. Those Romanian real estate deals are mentioned again, not just as investments, but as ways to show unconventional success paths.
The text also brings up backing businesses or startups that fit certain principles. Success, freedom, masculinity are mentioned. This is framed as a way to directly steer companies and spread your philosophy in the marketplace.
Sponsorships are another angle discussed, like supporting kickboxers or being involved in sports events. The source suggests this isn't just about getting your name out there. It's about building a legacy and promoting the idea that success comes from discipline, from defying norms, using money to shine a light on people who embody the values the source promotes.
And this financial freedom, which comes from various businesses, is also described as allowing for unfiltered speech, as the source puts it. The money lets you create content on platforms. Rumble is mentioned, where you can talk about freedom, masculinity, money, without the kind of censorship you might find elsewhere. The source calls this achieving narrative sovereignty, being able to control the conversation.
And really importantly, the source highlights building community through things like Hustlers University, The Real World. These are positioned as ecosystems where wealth nurtures shared beliefs. Money gets invested, as the text says, in people, in their aspirations, in their potential. It's presented less like charity and more like starting a movement where success is shared and influence grows by helping others succeed too.
So the big takeaway presented in the source seems to be that wealth and influence are just totally intertwined. Money amplifies your voice, your reach, your ability to make things happen.
But the source also introduces the idea of responsibility that comes with that amplified influence. Having that kind of power, it suggests, means setting a standard for how others might use their wealth. Your financial actions and how visible they are can either reinforce or undermine the message you're putting out.
Right. Investments, causes you back, sponsorships. The text says these all reflect your values and shape your legacy.
The source suggests there's almost a duty to use influence positively, meaning it should actually benefit others, elevate them, not exploit them. Real leadership, as presented here, is about empowering people, opening doors for them, maybe challenging systems, sparking change.
So the source's main point on using wealth for influence seems to be about starting a kind of chain reaction,
Right.
where your own success helps launch others. It's framed as using wealth not just to live, but to lead and shape how people think and what happens next.
Which kind of brings us inside to what the chapter talks about regarding the psychology of money, the whole mental side of things.
Yeah, the source's perspective here is that money isn't just about the numbers, it's deeply connected to your mindset. It's like an internal battlefield reflecting your own fears and dreams.
And the biggest enemy presented in the source, the scarcity mindset. It suggests most people are trapped by thinking money is limited, which makes them hoard it out of fear instead of, investing or expanding.
And that's set against what the source calls the abundance mentality, where you see opportunities everywhere and you understand that money can actually make more money. The source uses Tate's own shift from kickboxing to business as an example of believing more is possible and then acting on it.
A really big piece of this psychological puzzle is how you handle risk. A lot of people freeze up here, the source says. Risk is unavoidable in things like crypto or real estate. But the philosophy presented is that the fear of risk is what actually keeps you poor. Risk is called the admission fee to the realm of wealth.
So it's not about being reckless, but about taking calculated risks, doing your homework, understanding the markets, and having the guts to bet on yourself. It's about managing that fear, reframing risk as opportunity.
The source also dives into the complex emotions around wealth. Money, it suggests, tends to amplify your personality. It can lead to complacency, paranoia, greed, or maybe generosity. The text really stresses emotional intelligence and the discipline needed to handle these extremes. It specifically warns about getting rich, quick losing drive, becoming isolated.
And then there's the social side, how wealth changes relationships. It can strain old friendships, stir up envy, attract the wrong kind of attention. The advice from the source includes keeping a tight circle of trusted people, focusing on real connections not based on money, and just being ready for people to see you differently, trying to stay authentic.
Yeah, the source really hammers home this idea that the mental blocks are often bigger hurdles than the financial ones. Your mindset is either your biggest asset or your biggest liability when it comes to wealth.
And the chapter lays out specific tactics for building that wealth mindset. One is beating scarcity, training yourself to see abundance, investing in chances instead of just hoarding cash, seeing money like an ever-expanding river, not a finite pool.
Another tactic is embracing risk. Learning to tell the difference between a wild gamble and a calculated move based on info. Growth happens outside the comfort zone, the source argues, and fear of risk keeps you stuck. So assess risks. Don't just avoid them. See them as stepping stones.
And lastly, emotional mastery. Being able to ride the emotional roller coaster of finance, the wins, the losses, without losing yourself or your values. The source repeats that discipline is crucial to keep a steady hand on the tiller through it all.
The source notes how profoundly wealth can affect your interactions.
Yeah.
It can isolate you or lift you up, depending on how you handle it. It's about balancing the power of money with being human. Personal growth, humility, integrity, connection.
Ultimately, the source's main point on the psychology of money seems to be, master the inner game first, before you try to win on the financial battlefield. Money, in this view, acts like a mirror, showing your inner strength, your resilience, your vision.
Okay, so to kind of bring this all together, the source also addresses what it positions as the ethics and consequences that come with wealth.
Right. The chapter acknowledges there's a line you can cross when pursuing wealth. It talks about ethics versus the difference between true power and hollow victory. And it notes that Andrew Tate's own methods for getting wealthy have definitely attracted scrutiny.
It discusses the ethical questions around how wealth is made. The source mentions that some of Tate's past businesses, like webcam operations or parts of his real estate stuff, have been looked at closely. It brings up critics who've called his methods exploitative, specifically mentioning his background in the adult entertainment industry as the text presents it.
Which raises this ethical dilemma the source discusses. Do the ends justify the means? The chapter asks that directly. It notes Tate's argument about needing intensity in business, but also concedes that how the public sees your wealth and where it came from really matters.
And the chapter comes back to controversies as presented in the source. Financial practices, accusations about promoting potentially harmful ideas or maybe unethical schemes, that criticism around the daddy-why crypto coin possibly being a pump and dump, that's mentioned again, with the source citing commentators like CoffeeZilla and their concerns based on this material. The text frames these issues as going beyond just what's legal, touching on moral responsibilities, especially when your influence affects other people's money.
The source also thinks about how wealth is used and the impact it has, pointing out that wealth can fund a lifestyle, spread messages, fuel projects. But its impact can range from positive change to potentially making social divides worse.
And the specific ethical challenge presented in the source around empowerment through education platforms like Hustlers University is brought up. It's about making sure the empowerment you offer doesn't end up misleading or taking advantage of the people who trust your advice.
The source states pretty plainly that ethical wealth management, from this perspective, boils down to integrity. It's about how your wealth shapes your legacy and the story behind each dollar earned.
Key points the source presents on managing wealth ethically include: first, ethics in how you get it. The source says every dollar tells a story about how it was made, affecting your reputation. It suggests your methods should align with your core values to avoid problems, hinting at needing a moral compass for your financial plans.
Another point is social impact. Wealth is shown as a tool that can do massive good or serious harm. The source talks about using resources to benefit society, maybe creating jobs, setting an example, but it also acknowledges it's hard to balance making money for yourself and helping the community.
And finally, the source talks about a balancing act, where personal ambition meets social responsibility. It suggests you shouldn't chase wealth just for its own sake, but think about the legacy you're leaving. This might mean reinvesting in communities, backing initiatives, staying connected to the broader human experience, as the source puts it.
So the source's core message on ethics seems to be that it's bigger than just piling up money. It's about the ripples your wealth creates and the legacy that lasts. How you use the opportunities wealth gives you is presented as what truly matters. Wealth is power, the source says, but that power, it concludes, requires wisdom, integrity, and a vision that considers the collective good.
And that pretty much wraps up our deep dive into this specific chapter covering Andrew Tate's perspective on wealth and influence.
Yeah, we've covered quite a bit. We looked at the core philosophy wealth is freedom, explored those specific strategies like real estate and crypto, including the controversies mentioned in the text. We examined the role of education, as described, how wealth is shown as a tool for influence, got into the psychological side, and touched on the ethical points presented within this source material.
And just to reiterate one last time, everything we discussed today was strictly an exploration of the source material provided to us. We aim to present the ideas and examples within it impartially.
This chapter definitely lays out a very specific way of thinking about wealth, not just having it, but how you get it, what you do with it, the mindset needed, all according to this particular text.
So thinking about everything presented in this source, which frames wealth as freedom, as influence, almost like a battle. Here's a final thought for you to consider, based purely on these ideas. According to the perspective laid out right here in this material, what responsibility do you think comes with the power you gain when you accumulate wealth?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
Thank you for joining us in this episode, diving into the life of Top G Andrew Tate. We hope you've gained valuable insights. Stay tuned for more episodes to come. You can grab our book on Amazon or Gumroad anytime. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, GenZCreatives. Wishing you an ample dose of pain and suffering like NVIDIA's CEO. See you next time.